Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. It appears Gibson has been working late in the lab at night and toying around with the idea of some new Archtops that recently made their way onto Reverb through Dave's Guitar Shop. Each of these listings have the same title to them, Archtop Prototype. So we might be able to draw some conclusions that Gibson might be giving more love to their old-time Archtop models. I mean, if you go to their website right now, look through all their acoustic type things, they don't even have like an L5 listed anywhere. As far as I'm aware, you can only get one through the made-to-measure program right here. But as far as getting any other L series Archtop, yeah, it just doesn't even seem possible at this point in time. So let's go ahead and dive into all 6 of these very interesting Gibson prototypes. So this is like the first base model that we're going to talk about. Looking at it, you have a really nice dark sunburst color in the center with the dark outline, tortoiseshell pickguard, which is looking pretty cool, and a trapeze tailpiece. The body itself is 16 inches wide and it has a traditional spruce top. And something about this one with an acoustic style sound hole makes it really interesting. I mean, take a look at this beautiful sight. Zoom in here on the sound hole, you can see the flamed maple back from the front. So that brings us to the back. The back isn't particularly book matched or anything, but it has the same finish and you can see that there's binding on the front and back of the instrument. The neck itself is 3 pieces of flamed maple with 2 walnut stripes running down it, the traditional Gibson 5-piece maple neck, and notice how the burst finish is slightly brighter on the neck. Now it's important to know that each of these prototypes are being sold as used as is, and you can see lots of nicks and dings. This one, they've got this huge dent at the back of the headstock. It's got pretty cool open back Rover tuners, that's certainly a vintage vibe. But unfortunately, Dave's Guitar Shop does not include any close-up headstock photos. But if you zoom in here, you can just barely see that it has the old style, the Gibson logo. But now it is time for this one to evolve. It gets a pickup, a little mini humbucker there, but the rest of the specs are very similar. You might notice things like the pickguard being a slightly different shade of tortoiseshell. But from the front, everything else is looking familiar here. This isn't necessarily a guitar body style that I would ever be interested in playing, but you can definitely see it's a harkening back to their old-time Archtop models. Admittingly, I really don't know a lot about the old-style Archtops or what these are based off of, but I do have an appreciation of them. I think the closest I've ever owned was an L7P, I think from the late 40s. However, back to the subject on hand, the biggest spec difference here is this one has a mahogany neck instead of the fancy looking maple neck. Cosmetically, I prefer this one, mainly because I associate that with only the highest end of Gibsons. And notice the binding cap on the back of the heel. And both styles have the same serial number, Proto number 1. Now we're moving on to the next family. It's similar to the other family we were just talking about, but now instead of the acoustic style sound hole, we have a more traditional looking F-hole style. It's still the same 16-inch wide body with a spruce top and maple back and sides, but take a special look at the style of burst this one has. Notice how it doesn't encompass the whole entire body, it's just kind of a small circle down there. Gibson started using this finish again on something they called the 34 burst. I think what makes this whole entire collections of instruments interesting is if I just showed you photos of these instruments with no commentary at all and asked you what year do you think these were made, I bet most of you would say like the 1930s, 1940s. Nobody would guess 2019. But moving on to the backside of this instrument, similar styled burst with the flamed maple, and the neck has a similar slightly brighter finish and is 5-piece maple in construction and has that all familiar Proto number 1 serial number, with open back Rover tuners. So now what happens when this one evolves? Well, it gets that larger styled burst finish, and again, it gets a little mini humbucker there. Another noticeable feature that follows the heritage of the first series is they ditched the 5-piece maple neck in favor of a mahogany neck on these electrified models. Now, I'm not sure, maybe there's a reasoning behind that, but the acoustic ones always seem to have maple, and the amplified ones always seem to have mahogany. But other than that, we do still have a figured maple back. I like that this one isn't too crazy. And we've got the same tuners, Proto #1 serial number, and something crazy happened to the back of this one, all scratched up, nicks and dings and all. But does this one evolve again? Kind of, but this one falls within its own category. This one has the L5 style trapeze tailpiece and is 17 inches wide. But notice, on top of having that mini neck humbucker, you also have binding along the neck, something that none of these other instruments have had. But perhaps my favorite feature of this one is the Florentine cutaway. None of these other instruments have had any cutaways, and I think that's what makes them look super vintage to me. But having a cutaway, this is like Ted Nugent style. You can play rock and roll on this thing too, as well as fancy bluesy jazz stuff. It utilizes the traditional F-holes. We have kind of a wider burst on this one. They're all pretty much the same finish. Like the others, it also has a The Gibson logo on the top, and the back, it's not crazily flamed or anything, but still there in maple. Knowing that the sides have been maple on all of these, I'm a little bit sad Dave's didn't include any photos of that, because sometimes that's where all the flame is at. But there again, take a note, mahogany neck on the amplified version. Prototype #1, this one, I'm not sure if that's dust or a bunch of dings, but this one has more of like a 70s style tuner on it. You can see these on like late 70s Flying V's, some Marauders, S1s will have them, even Les Paul standards. At least that's what I instantly think of when I see these metal tips instead of the plastic ones. But now, I saved the best one for last. Let's face it, those other 5, they're kind of cool guitars. It's interesting to know that Gibson's playing around with stuff. But now feast your eyes on this. This does not look like it was made in 2019. This one is 16 inches wide, so in between the other ones we were talking about, and 3¼ inch deep. The finish is kind of a really rustic vibe with a very faded out red with some yellows, but take a look at this trapeze tailpiece, rosewood in style, but notice that's the Gibson open book headstock design there, so we've got like 2 headstocks going on here. The listing refers to this one as Fingerstyle Prototype, and take a look at that pickguard. It's much smaller because you only need to rest your fingers on it. Also notice the really cool and underappreciated armrest. When I think an armrest, I instantly think the Mary Ford Les Paul. This thing is just so beautiful. If it had a cutaway, I probably would have just bought it. But now that I think of it, it reminds me of a guitar within David Gilmour's old collection. Now if you happen to have missed this video, I documented every single guitar he recently sold at auction. That's right, all 126 of them. I showed you the estimates, the prices, and I told you the story behind every single one of them, but it reminded me of this Gretsch that he had. I haven't really dove into Archtop world, so I'm sure there's a lot of different manufacturers that utilize sound holes that aren't in the shape of F-holes, but there's something freaky about this Gretsch that I like. Now once you switch back to this Gibson, it might not be as creepy and cool as that Gretsch, but I think it's a cool step in an aesthetic direction. I mean, can you imagine this thing actually being on display at a guitar retail store? The only other aspect where I think they failed and missed an opportunity is look at the headstock. I've got to zoom in, there's no good photos available, but they gave it a regular Gibson logo. When they gave all the other ones the Gibson, this one definitely should have had that. But if you still need a little bit more convincing that this thing is kind of cool, take a look at the back. Do I even need to say anything? Oh my goodness, look at this thing. The figuring and the finish on the back, it is just magnificent and perfect. On top of that, the neck is just ridiculous. And take a look up here. It's got a stinger. That's what that little black point is down here at the back. I could have lived without the custom shop decal because that's the only thing that gives it away as a modern instrument. And if you think the beauty and crazy of this instrument ends here, you would be wrong. Look at this. It has a side sound hole. So instead of projecting it out to your audience, you can hear your guitar better as well because it's just gonna blast it right in your face. I think that's kind of a cool, quirky feature here. But also take a look at the binding. That's just a combination of the back and the top put onto the sides, but it kind of gives it a faux binding appearance because everything's just heavily flamed. And here you can see Prototype #1. And you have the 510 Super Machine heads. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any playing samples of these prototypes, but I will play some Archtop style guitars. Now that we know that these things exist, I really do want to know your guys' opinions on these things. Are you happy that they exist? Is it cool that they could be potentially making a lineup of these guitars? Or do you think that these are just best to stay in their prototype phase, which honestly I think is what has happened here. I think they tried doing something fun and experimental, but gave up on the project and just sold off the prototypes, hoping some collectors will buy them. And after you've taken some time to ponder that question, let me know in the comments section if there's one of these that you would rock. Thank you, Troglodytes, for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.